What happens when a quiet black woman uncovers a decades-long scheme to divert public funds away from minority communities? They buried her in a basement job to silence her, but what she found down there exposed them all. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. On a crisp Monday morning in early October, Jocelyn Reed arrived at her office just before 8 a.m., as she had nearly every day for the past 19 years. Her corner on the ninth floor of the state municipal building offered no view, but she'd made the space her own over the years. Soft lighting, a dusty lavender plant by the window, and rows of neatly labeled files that lined her desk like soldiers. She wasn't a person who made noise. She didn't need to be. Her work spoke clearly enough for her. Jocelyn was the type of person you relied on without realizing it. She managed compliance records and departmental budgets for the State Department of Infrastructure. Not exactly glamorous, but essential. The kind of behind-the-scenes work that held everything together. That morning, she placed her lunch in the mini fridge, turkey sandwich, an apple, and one square of dark chocolate, and sat at her desk. She sipped her tea, booted up her computer, and opened the quarterly review spreadsheet she'd been updating all week. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until she opened her inbox. The subject line on the third message stopped her cold. Status update. Personnel transfer, Reed, J. Her brow furrowed. She wasn't aware of any personnel transfer. She clicked the email. Effective October 9th, Jocelyn Reed is to be reassigned to the Regional Field Archive Center in Greene County. Transfer approved by Deputy Commissioner Harold Mendez. Position, Administrative Clerk 3. No relocation assistance authorized. Greene County. That was nearly 100 miles away. She read the email again. Then again. Her heart picked up speed. There had been no discussion, no warning, no prior evaluation. Just a cold, clipped message, stripping her of her title, her responsibilities, and the life she'd built over nearly 2 decades. The regional archive wasn't even a real department. It was a converted records vault in a basement beneath the county courthouse, rumored to have rats and barely functioning heat. Field staff joked it was where careers went to die. Jocelyn stood up, shaky, and walked straight to her supervisor's office. Kevin Tate was a man of average height and inflated self-importance. He rarely looked Jocelyn in the eye, preferring to refer to her by her last name in clipped tones, like a sergeant addressing a junior soldier. She knocked once, entered, and held up her phone with the email open. "Is this real?" she asked, voice tight. Kevin barely glanced at the screen. "Oh, right. Yes, that's happening." "Why?" she demanded. "No one told me anything. This isn't even part of my contract." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling like she'd interrupted something important. "Look, the agency's restructuring. Leadership decided some roles needed to be shifted to streamline regional support. You were selected." "Selected?" she repeated. "I've been here for 19 years. My evaluations are spotless. This makes no sense." He shrugged. "It's above me." The order came from Mendez's office. Jocelyn's hands trembled. She'd worked under Deputy Commissioner Harold Mendez for over a decade. He knew her work ethic, her record, her reputation. And yet she hadn't received even a phone call. "Was there a complaint?" she asked, her voice lowering. "Did I do something wrong?" Kevin blinked. "Not that I know of. It's just administrative shifts." But his tone, clipped, indifferent, said otherwise. Jocelyn returned to her desk in a daze. She sat down, opened her inbox, and stared at the screen, willing the email to disappear. Maybe it was a mistake, a misfiled document. Someone else's notice accidentally sent to her, but more emails arrived, meeting removals. Project access revoked. Budget files she'd worked on for months locked with red, restricted, icons that IT wasn't a mistake, IT was an erasure, by 3 p.m. Her phone buzzed with a call from HR. The voice on the other end was polite but detached. "We'll need your updated contact information and a signature on the transfer documents by Thursday. Your position at the Archive Center begins next Monday." Her stomach turned. That night, Jocelyn sat in her small apartment on the edge of Charleston, staring at her untouched dinner. The TV played softly in the background, some news anchor discussing state funding for education, but she heard none of it. Why was this happening? Who wanted her gone? The following morning, Jocelyn arrived at work early, hoping to find answers before the rest of the office filled with the usual buzz of copy machines and rushed footsteps. But the silence in the building that day was a different kind of quiet, brittle and heavy. She felt it the moment she stepped out of the elevator. Coworkers who normally greeted her with a polite nod or a quiet morning barely acknowledged her presence. Some glanced up and looked quickly away. Others huddled behind cubicle walls, whispering with heads bent together. Jocelyn was used to a certain degree of professional distance. She'd always been reserved, not unkind, but not overly social either. But this was ice. When she passed by the break room, two employees, one from records, another from finance, fell silent mid-conversation. The microwave beeped. Jocelyn kept walking at her desk. Her access to nearly all systems remained restricted. Her email account had been migrated to a temporary mailbox with limited functionality. The spreadsheets she'd spent months building now belonged to someone else. A junior analyst with 3 years on the job and no clue what to do with them, by noon. Jocelyn decided she couldn't stand the speculation anymore. She walked straight to Harold Mendez's office. The deputy commissioner was in, as always, seated behind a desk that gleamed like a showroom floor. Harold had always presented himself as polished, expensive cufflinks, a silver pen he never used but always displayed, and he'd built a reputation on smooth talking and strategic detachment. Jocelyn knocked once and stepped in when he motioned her forward. "Ms. Reed," he said, not even bothering to stand. "What can I do for you?" "I'd like to understand why I'm being reassigned," she said calmly, though every word felt like it scraped her throat raw. His expression didn't change. "As I understand, it was part of a broader departmental transition," he replied. "Budget-driven. A number of personnel have been shifted for operational efficiency. I've reviewed the budget," Jocelyn said, carefully, "and the only position eliminated or moved is mine." That gave him a brief pause that he leaned back slightly in his chair. Sometimes individual decisions are made to accommodate longer-term goals. "That's not an answer," she said to Mendez's tone cooled. "Ms. Reed, if you're here to argue the decision, I can assure you it's final. Your cooperation in making this transition smooth is expected and appreciated." Expected, appreciated. The words struck her as so hollow, so rehearsed, she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. But something in his eyes, or maybe the way he avoided hers, told her this wasn't just about budget cuts. Back at her desk, she found an interoffice envelope waiting for her. No note, just the official reassignment forms, along with a non-disclosure agreement she was expected to sign before her departure. She stared at the NDA for a long time. It was standard language, or so it claimed. A few paragraphs prohibiting her from discussing internal administrative decisions, interpersonal matters involving executive staff, and any classified material acquired during her tenure. Her hands trembled slightly. She'd seen NDAs before, reviewed them for projects, redlined a few. But this one felt personal, silencing, strategic. She placed it aside. By the end of the week, Jocelyn had cleaned out her desk. No one offered to help. No one asked where she was going. It was as if the entire floor had agreed she'd never existed. Her nameplate was gone by Friday afternoon. She didn't even get a goodbye. The Regional Archive Center in Greene County wasn't a building. It was a basement, beneath the courthouse, tucked behind an unmarked steel door. It smelled of mildew and forgotten paper. The walls were concrete, the lights buzzed with a faint yellow flicker, and the only window, a narrow, barred slit near the ceiling, offered a view of a concrete ramp used by sanitation trucks. Jocelyn arrived on her first day at precisely 8 a.m., just as she always had. But this time, there was no receptionist, no supervisor to greet her, just a single laminated note taped to a filing cabinet. New transfer. Begin by digitizing folders in section B through F. Password for system. GC 2023 start. No name. No signature. Her new desk was a scratched metal table next to a humming server cabinet. The air was dry, but still somehow felt damp. She set her coat down on the back of the rolling chair and sat quietly, taking in the space. There were boxes everywhere, stacked floor to ceiling. Some labeled, some not. Some water damaged, some shredded along the edges as if mice had gotten to them long before she had. For the first few hours, she simply read labels. She touched each folder gently, as if she were tracing the lives of people who'd been sealed into bureaucracy, death certificates, old pension forms, court requests from the 1980s. She found a torn manila envelope labeled diverted unfunded caseloads/internal, stamped in red with a date. June 2005. It felt like an artifact. Something she wasn't supposed to see. The system was archaic. A local drive with folders labeled only by year and initials. Password-protected archives with no instructions. She had no team, no supervisor, and no calendar of tasks. Just a list that seemed to grow every time she opened a cabinet. She worked through lunch. By the time she left at 5:30 p.m., the sky was already dark. Outside, the courthouse parking lot was empty, save for one janitor's truck and a pair of rusted bicycles chained to a cracked pole. Her new apartment, if it could be called that, was a rented room above a hardware store. It smelled of glue and metal. The radiator clanged every half hour, and the walls were thin enough to hear the man next door arguing with his dog. Jocelyn unpacked one suitcase. Just enough to survive. A few sweaters. A photo of her mother. A mug with a chipped rim she couldn't bear to throw out. And then she sat in the dark at the edge of the bed and stared at the cracked ceiling. What had she done to deserve this? What had she failed to do? That night, she dreamed of file folders falling like leaves. Endless, rustling, burying her as she stood frozen, unable to speak. By the third week, the rhythm had become mechanical. Jocelyn would arrive at 8 a.m., turn on the wheezing desktop computer, open a spreadsheet marked Digitization Log, 2003 to 2008, and begin scanning documents into the county's outdated archival system. She rarely spoke, rarely saw anyone. Lunch was taken alone at a folding table in the break alcove beside the janitor's mop sink. The silence in Greene County was so absolute it began to feel like insulation, as if she had been wrapped in layers of irrelevance, forgotten not only by her colleagues, but by time itself. Until the afternoon she opened the wrong box. It was late Thursday. Rain pattered gently against the single basement window. She had just finished cataloging a set of pension disbursement forms from 2004 when she pulled a misfiled carton from the very back of Section A-No barcode. No entry in the system. No label, except for a thin black marker slash across the top. SC 77/internal dispute. Not for processing. Curious, she opened it. Inside, instead of case files or correspondence, she found a collection of memos. All copies, but high-quality ones. The first page bore a department header she hadn't seen in years. Office of Strategic Grants and Community Development. The first memo was dated March 17, 2006. As Jocelyn flipped through the pages, her brow furrowed. The memos detailed a state-funded pilot program meant to increase access to affordable housing grants in historically underrepresented communities. She remembered the program. It had launched under a different name and had supposedly ended due to lack of funds. But what she held told a different story. There were notes, handwritten ones, outlining how funding had been diverted to more politically viable recipients. Neighborhoods with predominantly white populations, some with income averages that clearly exceeded the eligibility threshold. One note, scrawled in the margin of a page, read, "Too many optics if we keep pushing funds into Northfield Zone 3. Find a quieter pipeline." Jocelyn's stomach turned. She kept reading. One document referenced the rejection of a community-led initiative in East Dorrance, a black-majority neighborhood that had been lobbying for housing rehabilitation funds for nearly a decade. The form showed a falsified scoring report. A name she recognized signed at the bottom. Harold Mendez. She sat back in her chair. For a long moment, she just stared at the papers, hands trembling slightly. She wasn't naive. She knew politics was a dirty game. But this wasn't politics. It was targeted suppression. People's lives had been quietly redirected behind closed doors, and the people responsible were still sitting comfortably in power. Jocelyn carefully reassembled the documents in the exact order she'd found them, slid them into a file sleeve, and tucked it deep into her personal satchel. She closed the box and placed it back on the shelf, but sideways, a silent marker for herself. That night, back in her rented room, she laid the documents out across her bed. Each memo was a piece of a puzzle. Each handwritten comment, a clue. And she realized something. She hadn't been transferred because of budget cuts. She'd been buried. Sent somewhere no one would look. Silenced before she could stumble onto something like this. But they had miscalculated. They'd underestimated her. Jocelyn didn't sleep that night. Instead, She sat at the small desk in her rented room, the documents fanned out in front of her, a yellow notepad beside her right hand. Her pen moved in quiet, deliberate motions, dates, names, abbreviations, each line drawing a clearer outline of the truth that BY morning. She had over 20 pages of notes. She knew this wasn't just negligence. This was targeted redirection of funds away from Black and immigrant communities, masked behind bureaucratic language and competitive scoring. The evidence sat in front of her, signed, dated, annotated. She had no access to the press, no allies in state government. Her professional network had gone silent months ago, but she had one name, Reggie Bell. He was a quiet analyst she had trained years ago, one of the few who had thanked her for her patience back then. Now, he worked for the Public Oversight Coalition, a nonprofit watchdog group that reviewed government accountability cases statewide. She found his number in an old folder, took a deep breath, and called. He answered on the third ring. "Jocelyn," he said, surprised. "It's been a while." "Reggie," she said, her voice low. "I think I found something. And I think I was sent away to make sure I didn't." A long pause. "Go on," he said. She did. Every detail. By the time she finished, Reggie was silent. Then he said, "Send me what you have. All of it." She scanned the documents at a local library, uploaded them to an encrypted drive, and sent him the link. Within 24 hours, he confirmed receipt. Then the wait began. Days passed. Jocelyn kept working in the archive, scanning, filing, pretending, but something had shifted. Her hands no longer shook. Her spine felt straighter. She had purpose now, and she carried it with quiet defiance. 2 weeks later, it broke. The Observer published a front-page expose. State grant diversion scandal. Whistleblower reveals racial bias in housing funds. The article was explosive. It included scans of the documents, quoted Jocelyn's notes, with her name withheld, and described in painful detail how millions had been redirected over the years to benefit more desirable districts. The response was immediate that a state ethics investigation was launched. Legislators demanded accountability. Community groups rallied outside the Capitol, and Harold Mendez, he resigned within 3 days. His statement cited personal reasons and a desire not to distract from the department's work. But the damage was done. His name was forever linked to the scandal. So was the department. At first, Jocelyn declined to comment publicly. She didn't need the spotlight. She didn't want it. But then, one local reporter, a young woman named Lila Chavez, reached out with sincerity in her voice. "People need to hear your voice," she said. "We know it was you." And finally, Jocelyn agreed. In the interview, published 2 weeks later, she sat in the sunlit corner of a quiet coffee shop, wearing a gray coat and a calm expression. The photo caption read, "Jocelyn Reed, the archivist who refused to stay silent." The article didn't dramatize her. It didn't paint her as a hero or a victim. It simply told the truth about her work, her transfer, the silence that followed, and the moment she found the file she was never meant to open. That same week, the Greene County Archive Center received a call from the central office. Jocelyn was being reinstated, not to her old position that had been eliminated, but to a new one, created within the Oversight Division, reporting directly to the Inspector General. Her new title, Senior Compliance Advisor, Ethics and Transparency Division. She would review grant distributions, internal audits, and whistleblower protections. When she arrived at her new office, a modest but sunlit space on the 6th floor of the Capitol complex, a small potted plant was already sitting on the desk. A note beside it read, "Thank you for remembering what they tried to forget." RB that afternoon, as Jocelyn unpacked a few personal items, her mug, her lavender desk plant, the photo of her mother, she looked out over the courtyard below. People moved like little threads weaving the city's daily rhythm. She knew most would never know her name. They wouldn't know the files she'd saved, the price she'd paid. But that was fine. She didn't do it to be remembered. She did it because silence has a cost, and she had paid enough. Now it was time for someone else to be held accountable.